Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast presented by Onyx. On today's episode, I am joined by Joel Turner of Shot IQ. Joel he's great at a lot of things, but he's come up with a way of how to fix target panic for shooters of all weapons, whether that's bow hunters, whether that's rifle hunters, whether that's pistol shooters, and it doesn't require buying any gear. Joel talks about why target panic happens, subconscious aiming, the mental control systems, shot activation techniques, and how to execute the perfect shot on a hunt, and much more. This episode is brought to you by Onyx, and the Onyx Hunt app is your premier GPS hunting app that turns your phone into a working GPS. Onyx was founded on the land ownership detail on the map, and I find myself using that quite a bit to find overlooked hunting spots. Whether it's in the east or the west, you can find some overlooked pieces of public by getting behind the private, which probably has a good food source too. If you want to check out the Onyx Hunt app for yourself, head over to onyxmaps.com and use the coupon code EMW to save 20%. Tethered is a company that is founded on the principles of educating the hunting community on saddle hunting, while creating the most innovative, lightweight, safe products for saddle hunting. I'm currently using the Phantom saddle system with the Predator platform on all of my mobile hunts. And the recliner accessory is a must-have if you're trying to make your all-day sits extremely comfortable. So to learn more about Tethered and saddle hunting, head over to tetherednation.com. Maven is building the highest quality optics at half the price of their competitors through their direct-to-consumer business model. They want to create the best optics for the job, period. Their products are backed with a lifetime no-fault warranty and an incredible customer experience. So I'm currently using the Maven B3 8x30 binos in all of my eastern hunts. They're small, lightweight. It makes them easy to keep around your neck for shed hunting, turkey hunting, scouting, and hunting out of my saddle. You can use the coupon code eastmeetswest-gift for a free gift with any full price optics order at mavenbuilt.com. And I actually just uploaded a YouTube video on my channel, which is Beau Martonik, and it's all about how to choose the correct optics for whitetail hunters, and it breaks down, what you should kind of look for and how to determine, what's the right size glass for you, all that stuff. And then I show a little bit the B3 8x30s that I just talked about. So you can find that over on my YouTube channel, and there will be a blog on Maven's website that goes along with that. Maybe even out today. I'm not sure. I think it's supposed to release today. And then last but not least, Spartan Forge. So the Spartan Forge outfitter utilizes years of military background and machine learning to pull from millions of data points to accurately predict deer movement, including GPS data, 30 years of weather, academic, and state research. They're using science rather than someone's opinion to figure out the movement for your specific hunting area. You can use the code EastMeetsWest to save 25% off the outfitter at SpartanForge.ai. And if you make sure to sign up now, you'll be locked into the price before the new app releases and that price rises. So if you pay the price that it is now, you're locked into that for good. You won't have to pay any increases. It's a pretty solid deal. So check that out. On this week's Mountain Buck Story of the Week, or otherwise known as Mountain Buck Monday on social media, this story comes from Clayton Blow. Clayton says that, my buddy and I did some map scouting the night before the second day of the West Virginia rifle season and decided on checking out a big secluded ridge. We both still hunted opposite sides of the ridge, and our idea was to either get a shot at a buck or hopefully bump them back and forth to each other. I came to a spot where I could see a decent ways down the side hill and bumped what I could tell was 2 bucks, 1 shooter, and 3 does. So I texted my buddy and told him to drop below a subtle finger ridge and take that elevation the whole way around so he either could cut them off and get a shot or bring them back around to me. So I got into a position where I thought the deer would escape and come through. And about an hour later, this buck was bumped by my buddy and came up through the terrain feature that I figured deer would come through, and I made the shot. This was an awesome experience to pick a spot on the map and make it happen on an out-of-state trip. And I think this story from Clayton is pretty awesome. You know, going to a different state, out of state, scouting on the map, going in and getting it done there on that first day is pretty awesome. I got some photos up over on Instagram. Beautiful buck, packed it out. That's a story that I'm sure that he will not forget. So definitely submit your Mountain Buck Monday stories to me, and I'll be sure to share them. And just an FYI, I do have quite a few in the backlog, so if it takes a while for me to share them, I didn't forget about you. I will share them. It just takes a little bit to get through them there. And as I mentioned, the new YouTube video and blog, they're up now, so you can check that out. Just head over to my YouTube channel and take a look at that, about the best binoculars for whitetail hunters. And in other news, I guess this past weekend was the Pennsylvania turkey opener. So I went out Friday night, try to locate some birds. It was so windy, you couldn't hear a thing. But so as soon as I realized I wasn't going to be able to hear anything, I started shed hunting, and it was an area that I was deer hunting quite a bit. So I started just looking around. I had found a really nice side to this. I think it's a 4.5-year-old deer. And so I started looking for the other side, and I'd covered a lot of it and gridded the area. And there's this patch of hemlocks that was I kind of overlooked it. I walked pretty close to this spot. I mean, probably even 40 yards, but it's really thick. And I just covered this little piece there, and I found the other side of that shed. So it's probably about 500 yards apart from the first one. And it's a good 135 to 140 inch 9-point. Have a lot of photos and videos of this deer. Excited to see what he turns into this year. So went out Saturday turkey hunting, got to my spot, and at this gate I park at, there's a camp there, and I never see anybody there. But on this day, apparently everybody's coming up turkey hunt, because there was 4 trucks parked at the camp, and I was like, well, I don't know if they're out or not, but I don't want to risk screwing something up for them. They're there. So I was like, all right, I'll move to a different area. So at that point, I felt a little bit rushed, but I found a spot down the road. I'd never walked into this spot before, but it was on the edge of my hunting area. And I was like, I'll use it to try to find a bird and just do some more deer scouting. So I went in. I covered 9 miles and never heard a gobble. So it is what it is. It was a good hike. Got to learn the area some more, learn the extended area from where I've already been hunting, and but didn't turn anything up. I'll see if I can get out here before work a couple days this week. I'm not real hopeful I'll be able to make that happen. Been working a lot, but gonna try to see if I can make that happen. So if you were out for the Pennsylvania opener or any other turkey seasons, I hope you're having some more luck than I am. But I think you'll really enjoy this podcast with Joel. So I met Joel at Elk Shape Camp a few weeks ago down in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I've been following along with his stuff for quite a while, and now I have a membership to his online course, and he single-handedly is definitely the most helpful I've found when it comes to target panic. I think every hunter deals with it. You'll hear Joel talk about it, but it sounds so simple, his thought process behind it, but it's not that simple to make happen, and that's where you'll hear Joel talk all about it. But I think that anybody, whether you're a Western hunter, a whitetail hunter, deal with buck fever, all these things can really, really benefit from this episode. So I'm excited to get Joel on here and talking. Enjoy. All right, we're live. Joel Turner, what's going on, buddy?
All right, pal.
I'm doing all right. Just enjoying the spring weather here in Pennsylvania. What about you?
Yeah, nice day today here too. It's a little windy, but it's good concentration practice, right?
Yeah, like the first day down there in Lancaster when we were down there shooting at the steel target with the winds that were pretty high at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw you had just gotten back from another elk-shaped camp here recently.
Yeah, we did another one in Denver. It was really cool.
Yeah, those camps are so much fun. I mean, I only been to the one, but it's a blast hanging out with everybody and just it's a good time.
Yeah, it was the third one that I'd done, and we had me and Dirk there for some of the calling stuff, and Dirk Durham, the bugler. I've never actually, because back when I competed, I competed from 2005 to 2014, and Dirk was always there at the competitions, but he was real quiet, but if you can imagine that.
Yeah.
Like now he's the social media star and all this stuff, but back then, man, he didn't talk at all. So I've never actually sat down with Dirk and discussed our elk calling techniques, but it was really cool. And like is normal, it's the same stuff, just people approach it a little bit differently, but man, it's the same stuff. All the really good callers do it in a very specific way, so people should pay attention to that for sure.
Interesting. I was gonna ask if you guys had like really different styles or techniques or anything there, because Dan typically likes to try to take people that are completely opposite and make them kind of clash in talking about it. But
right, but it's elk or elk. Just like humans. So I got up there first and talked about my whole how I do it and how I humanize elk calling. And I had never heard Dirk talk about it before. And so it was really cool. I did mine first, and then we had lunch, and then Dirk went, and it was the same stuff. So it was really cool to be able to compliment each other on that. And it was good stuff.
Oh, that's cool. And especially since you guys didn't know each other going into it, or, kind of.
Well, we knew each other. We've competed in elk calling competitions for years, but, we've never really sat down. And I knew that Dirk had contacted me a couple of years ago dealing with some target panic issue stuff. And since that time, he hurt his shoulder and had to shoot with a mouth tab. And I think all those things made him a bit more conscious, because when I got a hold of him for his shot control stuff, he was pretty on point. And that was one thing that I wanted to bring up, talking to Dirk. I interview hundreds of people, right? Snipers, gunfighters, successful bow hunters, successful rifle hunters. And there is a pattern of success, and that is talking to yourself during your shot. And what you'll find is that all these people that I interview, they all say something to themselves. They all say something different, but it's all said usually in that critical second, right after the aim. And that's the most important thing. The problem is many of these people don't realize that they do it. And then they're not able to harness the power of it, right? Like saying things to yourself at specific moments in your shot is pivotal to your success. And, some of them may be embarrassed at what they say, or they don't realize they say it, but they say it every time. And that's the pattern of success. None of these people are successful blank-minded. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that I learned for sure from you at the elk shaped camp. And I've heard you on podcasts and stuff before, and everything. And it is amazing. Like since I was at that camp with you, every day before work, I go down and I do a workout in my basement, and then I'd shoot a few arrows, just a few arrows, and in between sets of what I'm doing or whatever. And I just every time try to go through the exact same I do go through the same process every single time. And
I just got done shooting with a guy, and he was having some issues. He'd been through the online course, and he was almost there, but he was missing a couple things. Like, what release were you shooting? I can't remember.
The knock to it.
Okay. So whether here's a big tip for your listeners. When you are figuring out what movement you are going to do on whatever release you shoot, okay, think of it as this. This is your baseline. you cannot move the head of the release. Be it that it might be a hook, it may be a gate, it may be, jaws that open, whatever. The head of the release cannot move in space. So if you are collapsing, the head of the release is going forward. If you are adding back tension and you're taking the release with you, you are moving the head of the release and you're increasing the tension. Therefore, your arrows will not hit in the same place. So whatever movement you decide to do on whatever release it is, you have to make sure that the head of the release stays locked in space. And all of your movements, if you're going to use back tension, it has to equate to hand movement, like maybe on your thumb button, you're stretching your hand. Remember that I taught you guys to do that?
Yep.
Maybe stretching your hand, but if you stretch your hand, it's your hand that's moving, not the release, right? For all those index finger trigger shooters out there, when you hook your finger around the release, if you don't let your other fingers off the release, then you're pulling the whole release with you and not necessarily the trigger. That's why you get your fingers off of the release and you just hook around it with your finger. And then it's the stretch of your hand basically in the strap, but the head stays still in space, right?
Yep.
So when you're trying to figure out a shot activation movement, whatever the release is, you just can't move the head of it.
That was one of the things that I had no idea as far as how to actually activate. I've heard, use back tension, do this, do that, but never how to actually do it. I was thinking I was doing something right until you got there and you were up in my face and hit me with your arrow. And then you're like, just relax that hand and do it. And, and I cognitively think about that every time that when I'm going up, making sure that I'm doing that the correct way. And it's been pretty awesome. I did some shooting over the weekend. I had a guy in to film some of these scouting courses that I'm doing, and he and we're putting together this mule deer film for this year. And in preparation for that, I was doing some shooting in front of the video camera there, and which adds some stress. And he's right there, and I felt good going through it, and it makes you love shooting when you're shooting correctly and doing it
in
with
control,
the right,
right?
Yeah, in control.
And that's another thing with this guy is he had his sequence slightly off. So for hinge shooters out there, it's not a back tension release. Get that out of your head. It has to hinge for it to go off, right? So, and some people use a click, some people don't use a click. I highly recommend that you use a click in that, because the click is a decision point, right? So you draw back and aim first. Then you consciously move to the click, and it can be open loop, right? You just roll your hand to the click, and then here I go, right? Get yourself through that critical second, and then you talk yourself through it. And he had that sequence a bit out, but when we were going around the course today, it was, I'll try to do this. I'll try to do that. I'm like, look, man, shot control is not something that you try to do. Either you do it or you practice your own failure.
Yep.
You choose, right? Your shot, you have opportunities in a shot to make yourself exponentially better, or you're literally practicing your own failure in a high stress shooting event. Yep. So it's, that's the decision. That's how important it is to control your shot.
And we are getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I need to introduce you a little bit here, but
you gotta be careful, man, because I'll just keep rolling.
I know, and I do the same thing. But that's why when I got you on the line, why I didn't spend too much time talking to you ahead of time before I hit record, because otherwise we get into deep conversation and I missed a lot of good stuff. So that's why I wasn't being rude. That's why I did that. But
that's good.
But I did notice, like when you're saying about practice your failures, one of the things that I've realized was in my steps, I was missing that second step basically when I'm drawing so I was getting I step up to the line, and again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm going to say it anyways, saying I'm going to make a perfect shot. And then when I draw back, I wasn't saying anything until I was aiming. And if I remember right, you were talking about, as you're drawing back, the having some sort of a sequence in your head. And then once I get my pin on there, saying, here we go, once I aim, and then going through the pull. But
so even more specifically, draw back and aim, get it done, right? And then put your thumb on the button and climb into it how you want. And then here I go. And then talk yourself through the movement. Because, for those people that are locked off target, their aim means everything to them, and they don't have any way to separate from it. And that's what here I go does. Even putting your thumb on the button should separate you from the aim. And this analogy that I keep working with, I know I told you this guy about opening doors, right? Well, imagine a shot as you're standing on the porch of the shot control house. You ain't in the house yet, right? So making that original decision, I'm going to shoot this shot with control no matter what. That opens the door to the house, right? Now you can step inside the house, but the first room that you come to is the aiming room. Just walk right through it, right? Get into the aiming room, set your pin where you need it, and then when you put your thumb on the button, that starts to close the door to the aiming room. But here I go, closes the door on the aiming room and opens the door to the concentration room, right? So you're working through the house of shot control. You got to open doors, you got to close doors. So that's what these decisions do for us. So when you make it sequential like that, like when I see all these people shooting whitetails out of the tree stands or ground blinds or on the ground in a ghillie suit, however you choose to do it, the shot is no different. But I see all these guys blending, right? They're blending the aim with the trigger work. Therefore, they're punching the crap out of the trigger and they're shooting these bucks in the guts at 15 yards. But it's only because they've practiced their own failure over and over again. And then when it comes to that moment of truth, they prove it to themselves that they have, and they fail again, right? In the ultimate challenge.
Yep, I've been there. I'm not going to lie. I think just about anybody has.
Absolutely. We've all been there. But the difference between, you moving on from that and actually controlling your shot is learning how to make decisions. Like, I don't know if you saw that post I just put out, but this morning I did a polar plunge, right? I walked into the river slowly. I put my ass in that water slowly, and then I fully submerged myself. I'm making decisions to do a movement that's going to cause my body impact, right?
Yeah.
So who knew that a polar plunge could be such amazing shooting practice, right? It's the same thing. It's a conscious override of your central nervous system.
I have not. I didn't see that post yet, but I'm gonna have to go back and
check it out, man.
and look at it. Back in, I think it was like in 2016, I was working for an archery shop, and we were a sick gear dealer, and I wanted to. That was right when Barklow started coming out with this stuff about cold weather training and the whole rewarming drill. I was like, I'm gonna do this, and we're gonna make a video to show people at the shop. So I went into a pond that was like frozen over and went into it and sat down in the water. I know that feeling.
It makes shooting so much easier. I mean, it's the same decision, but to actually work a trigger slow enough you can stop it to create an explosion, that's a hell of a lot easier than dipping your ass in a river.
Oh, that's funny. Well, Joel, let's take a step back and introduce yourself. Who is Joel Turner?
Well, Joel Turner was Shot IQ and 44 years old, and I did not gain control of my shot, like total control of my shot, until 2014. And I started shooting a bow when I was 7, just slinging arrows, right? Loving it. Became a teenager, slinging arrows, not good, missing bull elk, ridiculous amounts of bull elk, and became a 2-time world elk calling champion. So it was not the calling was the problem. It was the keeping myself under control. So in those years, I had very few successes and oodles of failures, right? And it wasn't until that day, December 14th, 2014, that I actually gained control of my shot looked back at my successes, figured out that it was the decisions that were missing, right? So I'm a police officer. I've been a cop for 20 years now, sniper team leader on a SWAT team for 18 years, been in some fairly high stress events, and vetted everything that I've ever taught. And that's, it's pretty cool stuff. Literally cracked the code to shot control and created shot IQ and control process shooting just to have a medium to get this word out to people, because literally mankind has been looking for this information since we started shooting bows and arrows. So,
it's funny because, there's so many things. If you type in target panic on a Google search, you will find so many articles, so many things, so many gadgets, so many tools, so many things to do to cure it. But what I've learned from working with you a little bit and talking to you is that it's so much simpler than, it's not as complicated as you think, but it's a decision point. And what interests me is how you kind of came to that conclusion. Like, how did you find that? I know you said through years of, doing this stuff and figuring out analyzing your successes, but how did it come to, this is my mind that's controlling that, and then developing it into what you're doing currently?
Well, growing up, if you gave me a 22 or an air rifle, unstoppable, right? Just loved shooting, was good at it. It was easy, but you put a centerfire rifle in my hands, worthless, absolutely worthless. I would yank that trigger the instant it got on hair of a coyote, a deer, whatever it was. So I wasn't a good shot. And of course I wanted to be a good shot because hunting and shooting was my life. Right. And so, up to the point where I became a police officer and went to the academy and wanted to do super well in firearms. And I was doing good in firearms, but not quite there yet. And it was funny because my buddy who I went in the academy with was having trouble, man. He was shooting a Glock and just yanking the crap out of the trigger. So in the middle of the academy, because I was shooting decent, they allowed me to switch guns. So I actually sold my pistol that I was shooting, which was a 1911 with a double action trigger. It was this old pair of ordnance. And so I sold that to him so that he could pass the test. I bought a new 1911, which has got a really short trigger, span in it. So I shot it better. But what I was starting to realize was all I needed to do was stay in that trigger press, right? The aiming was kind of taking care of itself. It moved, but it wasn't this thing that all the instructors told me it was. I didn't have to focus on the front side. I didn't have to keep it in the middle of the notch because it kind of stayed there by itself. And so I started to think more and more about the trigger press. And by the end of the academy, I started to figure some stuff out. And I took top firearms in the academy. And then I took that to my rifle shot, basically. And I'm like, okay. So now if I concentrate on the trigger press, I can stay in that trigger press and I can shoot it as a surprise break, as everybody always told me. Oh, you want to make it a surprise, right? Well, nobody ever told me how in the hell to do that.
Yeah.
And so then 2 years into being a cop, I became a firearms instructor because I loved it and I knew I wanted to be an instructor. So that was the one day that I was working with this kid in the academy. I was an instructor at the academy, and he was just yanking the trigger so bad that the target was at 20 and he's hitting the floor at 15. Right. So I'm thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get this kid to work his trigger? So I remember very specifically talking him through that and started with, okay, aim at the target. Are you aimed? Yes, sir. Okay. I want you to take the slack out of the trigger, but don't make the gun go off. So I saw his finger move to the pressure wall. And then I'm like, okay, I want you to start pressing the trigger, but don't make the gun go off. And as soon as I started to see the squish in his finger, and I saw that trigger move just slightly, I'm like, okay, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing. And I'm watching his finger move in the exact rhythm that I'm talking. And so finally, I just talked him all the way through it, and he shot the round as a surprise, and it went through the center of the 10 ring. And that was my light bulb moment. That's what set me on the path of research on how in the hell did I do that, right? And it was about, figuring out what is neurolinguistic programming? How do we use words? What do words mean? Like words are nothing more than attentional cues. That's the route to concentration. And then I wrote a whole thing called The Mental Mechanics of Shooting, an instructor's guide. And I had very vetted instructors read it because they'd always been yelling front sight, front sight, front sight. When they knew deep down inside, the front sight was not the problem. It was not an aiming error. It was because the recruits were yanking the crap out of the trigger, right? And they didn't know how to stop that. And, through the ages of firearms instruction, nobody had figured that out. And it's only because they were skipping over what we now know is the core problem in shooting. And that is your mind will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise. If it can time the explosion, it will time the explosion. And it will do that by linking pre-ignition movements to the trigger motor program. So when you yank the trigger, there's all kinds of other muscle contractions that happen that deviate your point of impact, right? So it just kept going on and on. I was doing more and more research into, concepts in motor learning and performance and kinesthesiology. And what I did is I took the science. When I learned it, I took the science and I meshed it with my experiences. And that's where controlled process shooting was born. And once that was born, and even though it was still in its infancy, I was still too hung up on the words and all this stuff as far as you have to concentrate by talking and all this. But what I didn't realize was the fail point. The fail point of most human beings is they don't have enough determination to step into the shot control house, right? And if they do have enough determination, they have to know what to do with that. They have to know what decisions they need to make, when they need to make them, and then how to carry them out, right? So finding these fail points was key. Finding my own fail points was really key. And that was like December 14th, 2014. That's the day that I shot that big buck in the heart. But it was not a controlled shot. And I sat in that tree stand in the rain and in the dark until I figured it out. And luckily I'd had a couple successes a few years earlier. And I was able to remember the difference between those two shots and all the rest of them throughout my life. And those two shots had decisions made, right? And they had those decisions made at very specific moments. And so that's what really got me to blueprint my controlled shot and be able to teach it to everybody else. And it is freaking powerful to know how you're going to shoot every shot for the rest of your life. So there you have it. That's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's cool. You answered that question really well as far as like how you actually remembered the exact moment when that triggered your mind. Like, okay, this is by teaching somebody and being that was something that was subconscious in your own mind, but it brought it to the front of it essentially.
I think I needed to see it from the instructor side of it, because if you're just dealing with your own mind all the time, it's more difficult to analyze it. But now that I see it and I was able to teach it and that light bulb moment happened, man, now shot control is easy. And I told the guy today, I was telling the house analogy, right? You're standing on the porch. If you don't make a decision, I'm going to shoot this shot with control no matter what. When you hook up your release and you put your hand on that bow, that front door to the shot control house doesn't even open. But when you make that decision over and over and over to the point where it becomes a principle by which you live, when you step up on the porch, there isn't even a door there. It's already open, right? Yeah. It's like you blew it off with explosives. There's no way I ain't stepping in that house. I'm not shooting any uncontrolled shots, right?
Yeah.
So, and then the floor plan of that house, you can navigate it so easily now.
So I guess, so you kind of answered it there, but what, if you were to define target panic, how would you define that?
So target panic is something that every human being is born with. It's not a disease that you get by thinking about your shot too much or anything like that. It's just the core problem in shooting. Your mind will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise. Simple as that.
Okay.
Right? So that's why people punch the trigger, because they're linking the trigger motor program with pre-ignition movements. They don't do that, on purpose. That's just how we work. Like if I, kicked you in the chest right now and back in, you would catch yourself, right? That's target panic. Impact's coming, so you have pre-ignition movements or pre-impact movements to catch yourself. It's the same thing when you press a trigger on a rifle or a pistol or a bow, especially with a bow, because your body is in tension and it wants to get you out of that tension. It wants to know when that bow is going to explode. It's a sudden release of energy. That's the definition of an explosion, right? So that's the core problem. And that is target panic in a nutshell. It only comes to light in a few versions. Like when you're shooting a compound, it's either you can't put your pin on the target without punching the trigger, or if you put your pin on the target, you can't work the trigger slowly. You punch it. Therefore, it's open loop. Therefore, it has pre-ignition movements linked to it. And you only get to a certain level of accuracy. And that's what I see most people, a lot of people, especially on TV. My God, what is the matter with people on TV? Just,
old rattlesnake in it.
I heard one guy on TV tell the world that this stabilizer that he was shooting, that cured his target panic. That is the biggest pile of crap that I've ever heard in my life.
Well, when I felt like I went through the worst of my target panic, as far as like when I felt like I was completely falling apart, I couldn't get my pin up. I was always stuck below, and I was struggling. I was missing deer. I mean, but then it started with I was shooting good, then I wasn't when it mattered, and then it became that I fell apart all the time. I'd be at the range and I'd be shooting and just struggling getting it up on there. I get it up and I just slam that trigger. Well, I'm like, oh, well, my bow's too top heavy. So, I'm putting all these weights on the back of it, and I'm doing all these things, and I'm like, I'm still holding low. And at this point, my bow weighs like 19 pounds because I got all this shit hanging off of it. And I wasn't thinking about it the right way. And I was and then the more frustrated I got, the more I just kept thinking about not missing, and that wasn't the right thing either.
No. So I mean, people they try to mechanically fix a mental problem, and it usually goes the other way because your subconscious thinks you're doing well. The more it can hold you off the target, and okay, Beau, get ready and jump and punch, right, all at the same time. I mean, you're only aiming for a microsecond, right? Yep. And you don't even see it. You don't even see the yip that you did or whatever. So people will start to weight their bow up so that they can, if they are able to get their pin on the target, they'll weight their bow up so that their pin moves slower. Well, that's the worst thing you can do, because the skill is not in, the initial skill is not in hitting the target. It's not even in shooting the shot. It's letting go of the aim. And so if you are watching your pin move, like let's say a Vegas face, right? If you're watching your pin move and you can comprehend that the pin comes out into the 9 ring, if you can comprehend that, then your bow is too heavy. You want your pin to move fast enough that you cannot comprehend it. It just sits there and shakes, right? And when it just sits there and shakes, it's a hell of a lot easier to let it go, right? You got to close the door on the aiming room and just watch it through the window. You can't touch it. Visual proprioception tells us that we have no control over our aim. You just have to watch it like a picture, right?
Yep.
But because your aim meant so much to you and your conscious mind stayed in the aim, there's no way it's going to let you get there without punching the trigger. So just changing the approach to it, draw back and aim, get it done, watch it to keep it. then making a decision to separate away from it. That decision, again, here I go, is what I like to have people say. Here I go, closes the door on the aim and opens the door on the concentration room and allows you to get in there, right?
Yep. No, it definitely does. And you've been talking about a couple different things that I think would be good for you to define them, which is the mental control systems that you can be in the open loop and the closed loop systems, and what that exactly, you've said it, but can you kind of clearly define it for anyone that's listening there? Because I think that was a huge learning lesson for me.
Right. So open loop, there's two control systems that govern all of the movements in your mind. One is an open loop control system. That's where the brain sends a motor program to the effector. The effector is what catches the motor program. Like, is it, what muscle group is it or whatever, to do a certain movement. The problem with open loop control systems is, number one, they're too fast for you to gain feedback. Like when you used to punch the trigger, when you sent that motor program, it was sent, and it's so fast that you can't stop it in the middle of it. And if you can't stop it, that means that all kinds of other movements get sent through the same neural pathway, right? So it gets linked to all these other, clenching your bow hand, closing your eyes, collapsing, all that stuff gets sent through in the same neural pathway at the same time, right? So it all gets linked up and your mind loves it. Open loop control systems are used for swinging baseball bats, throwing a baseball, shooting a basketball. Those are all movements that should not be interrupted, right? It's a single motor program. It's sent and it's good. But precision shooting and precision trigger work is not open loop. It should be closed loop. Closed loop is a movement that's slow enough that you can gain feedback within it, slow enough that you could stop it anywhere within it, right? So when you're stretching that hand on that thumb button as you do now, you're stretching your hand at a rate that you can gain feedback in it. You could stop it anywhere, right? That's true control. But getting into a closed loop control system, when your mind doesn't like it and doesn't want to do that, it doesn't want the explosion to be a surprise. That's why getting into that closed loop control system takes such determination and decisions that make you present so that you can concentrate, right? All those 4 fundamentals of precision shooting. So open loop is fast, closed loop is slow. So you can make most things in your archery shot open loop. Like you setting your hand in the grip, that can be done fast. If it's wrong, you'll feel it that it's wrong and you'll just simply correct it. When you draw your bow back, that can be open loop, right? You getting into your anchor point, that can be open loop. But then once all that stuff happens and you get your aim done, that's when you have to stop and say, here I go. And that again separates all that open loop stuff and allows you to be present enough so that you can actually go closed loop on your trigger work. But again, your mind hates you for it. So you have to reconnect this determination every single shot because your mind hates you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, it does.
You're overriding your central nervous system every single time. So every time you shoot the shot and you step out the back door of the shot control house, you got to walk around to the front and the door's closed again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's this revolving thing. You gotta step up on the porch again. Damn door's closed. Got to make a decision to get it open. Right?
Yeah. That's so true. It's if you're not 100% in it and determined that you're going to make that perfect shot, you will forget it. Even if you're like halfway there, you're not mm-hmm. in it. Like when you'd watch people walk up to the line at camp and we were mm-hmm. shooting, you'd be like, as soon as they walk up and draw back, you're like, nope. Already, you didn't make the decision. Yeah. You didn't make the decision off the beginning.
I could see it coming. They're stuck out on the porch, right?
Yeah.
They're sitting in the swinging chair on the porch. I'm like, you never got in the house, bro. You know what I mean? It happened. So I was at the Denver camp, and there was 31 dudes that stepped up and punched the trigger. Every single one of them. And there could have been 1,000 people there, and I'd have watched 1,000 people punch the trigger, unless that particular person made decisions. Because people are nervous when they step up there, right? Because I'm messing with them. It's in front of the whole crowd. We were shooting a 60-yard antelope target that was placed in front of a giant metal Connex box. So if you missed, you're going to smoke your arrow, And, I watched all these people punch a trigger. Not one of them stepped up there and paused before they drew their bow back.
I want to get it over with.
Right? They're just shooting from the porch, man. You got to get in the house. So that's the deal. It was comical, but common.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only those folks that have really sat down and go, okay, how did I shoot? They shoot that good shot. And they go, how did I do that? And they ask themselves the questions of the blueprint. What was I thinking? What was I saying? Could I have stopped it? And what decisions did I make? I mean, the blueprint questions are money, man. If you can answer those things, you are well on your way to shot control.
Yep. That is interesting. And all right, so if you're in a real world situation, whether that, say you have an elk that comes in, he's coming in fast, you're calling that cow, and he comes in, and you go to, you feel like you have this quick window. He's stopping. You got to do whatever. Mm-hmm. How does that work in that time frame? Like, say you think you have only a split second to make it happen. Explain that a little bit, because I thought you explained that really well.
And that is the main thing, is that you think you have a split second, not the critter, right? So these hurried situations are usually conjured up in the human mind. They're not conjured up in the mind of the critter, right?
Yeah.
So like when you make your stop sound to stop that big whitetail buck that's walking by you, and he stops, he'll stand there plenty long enough for you to shoot a controlled shot. But what you need to do with your controlled shot is you need to make your blueprint so strong, right? You know what you need to think. You know what you need to say. You know you could stop it if you really needed to. And you know what decisions you need to make. And when you need to make those decisions, you just have to get good at organizing it, right? And making it so your original decision, the one that opens the door to the house, I'm going to shoot this shot with control no matter what. Maybe you shorten that to no matter what. Or maybe you make it so strong that you don't have to make it anymore, because there's no way in hell you're going to shoot an uncontrolled shot. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So you get better at the organization of it, but there is a certain speed at which your closed loop can travel. And that's the speed of movement that we're using on the trigger. So have I had critters walk out of my sight picture while I'm working through a trigger? Hell yes, I have. Not very many, but what's the alternative? You punch the trigger and miss or hit the critter where you don't want to? That's the alternative. And then shame on you, because you did not control everything that you could have, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of poor shooting that goes on out there, especially on TV. It's just a nightmare to watch people do this stuff and not go out and seek the information. Like, I don't know if they think, well, it's good enough or what, but man, it makes for horrendous TV. But yeah. But that's the boat that most people are in.
Yeah. And I feel like, I mean, even though the information's out there, unless like someone's heard about you or anything that you're doing or talking about, I mean, otherwise, it was always just put into my head that it had to do with, you just did it. You just had to make a good shot. You had to be better, but there was never an explanation on how to necessarily get to that point. And right. Yeah, the information's out there, but it's just like identifying that you need to find it at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a human being and you shoot stuff, we should probably have a chat, right?
Yeah. And like, and that brought me back to like with firearms. So like when I was under the impression, I don't shoot firearms a lot. My brother's the gun guy. He's a gunsmith. He loves shooting. He's all about that. And I've always been a bow guy. I'm like, oh, when, I didn't fill my bow tag and needed to pick up the gun, I'm like, oh, just aim and you shoot and that's it. Well, I think I had told you this. I was like, I missed a buck this past year at like 60 yards with my rifle. I'm like, well, I can't really find anything that makes me think that it was screwed up by anything other than myself. And, I pulled up, thought I was in the right spot, blacked out, slammed that trigger and, and missed. And cause I wasn't taking it across the board either. And like, I focused so much on archery that didn't realize that this can be applied the whole way across the board. And, shame on me for it, but it's being able to identify that and move forward so you don't do it again.
Just analyze what happened, right? You pressed the trigger as soon as you believed the aim was complete, right? So that was open loop.
Yep.
Therefore, there's pre-ignition movements that are linked to that trigger motor program. You probably closed your eyes before you actually yanked the trigger. And I mean, those are all pre-ignition movements, right? So it's that critical second. Imagine if we could just right now, Beau, if we could just get the world to allow their aim to not trigger the shot, but to trigger a decision. It would change the lives of everybody that shoots. If you just, as soon as you get your pin on, as soon as you get your crosshairs on, if you just work yourself through 1 second in time and you fill that 1 second with, here I go, or let's do this, or something, right? That gets you, that's a decision. It makes you intensely present for the next job. So when you get in those super high stress events, you might be all hopped up like crazy and you get them crosshairs on there and you at least go, whoa, okay, here I go, right? It's like this big slap in the face back to reality and reminds you of all the things that you still need to do to make that shot successful. So if I could just get people to do that, right? To just wait 1 second in time, right? And that's why I have people say, here I go. Here I go takes 1 second to say, right? It gets you through that critical second and allows you to become present again for your job.
Yeah, it is crazy. Like I remember again, I won't say that I had it perfect and I still don't probably now, but like when I was shooting my elk in 2019, that was like the year that I felt like I was getting up to it where I couldn't even shoot my bow. I ended up just going into my basement without anything on and just shooting it like 2 or 3 yards, just trying to get through the shot process and talking myself through it. And when I got to that point where this is my first bull elk, he's at 60 yards, my heart was going, just beating out of my chest. My pin was going back and forth so fast. I was like, it was just going back and forth. But as I was going through that process, I remember saying to myself, pull, and at the same speed, but elevating kind of the tone in my head. And I had a camera guy literally right over my shoulder, and it was on, he had his, camera on slow motion, so you could really see my pin, going up, but it just, you could see that shot broke and it was a complete surprise, and it went right through the double lung, and the bull ran out and he fell over another 60 yards from there. And it was just like the most satisfying feeling, like after struggling with that for so long to feel good about it. And and even, like I said, even at that time, I feel like I didn't fully grasp what I was doing, but it was a step in the right direction.
Right. And you did it, but you didn't analyze how you did it.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? Therefore, you're destined to fail again because you don't even know what the blueprint was for that awesomely controlled shot that you shot on the critter. And that's where I was. I shot my first real controlled shot with a stick bow on a critter in 2008. 2010, I did another one. But it wasn't until 2014 that I actually analyzed those two shots years later, right? Years later, because those shots were so conscious, I knew everything that I did. I realized I said this at this moment. I said this at this moment. I said this at this moment. And then I friggin' screamed myself through that movement at the end. And then I went, ding, 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 light bulbs are going off. And I'm like, I'm doing that for the rest of my life. And I have, once 2015 hit, man, I'm in control. I will always be in control. There's no question in my mind how I'm shooting every shot for the rest of my life, because I shoot like 200 arrows a day, 200 controlled arrows a day. I practice my success. I do not practice my failure. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And to be able to to really feel like you understand it, is to be able to practice. It seems, for me anyways, when you practice under that pressure in some sorts, like when Dan had us running back and forth from the targets, and you get there and he's over the back and he's shoving his cell phone in my face with his camera on. And then, you have all these other guys stand there next to you and you're racing against the guy there, and a steel target around the vitals was the only thing that was open. When I drew back, again, I was out of breath. I had all these things going on, but to be able to, every time you say one of those things at that critical moment, it kind of resets you, and you might start to fade a little bit, and then you get back on it and be able to do it. And it's really one of the most satisfying feelings. And that's why I wanted to talk to you, because it was like, man, this is something that can change anybody's lives. How much work, say most of my listeners are from the East, and they're planning these Western hunts and stuff. You work all year. You're doing your e-scouting. You're doing your training from the fitness side, shooting your bow, doing all these things to get ready for that 1 week that you're taking off of work, away from your families, whatever it is. And you have that one moment that you have one chance to make it happen, and you blow it. Well, that doesn't sit well with me.
No, it shouldn't sit well with anybody.
No.
Right. And, they get their bows out a couple months before season and they shoot. They might as well not shoot, because they're practicing their own failure. It's not going to be good anyways. When you gain control of your shot, you only need to shoot enough to make the decision strong enough to where they become principles, right? Like, I don't have to step up to the line and go, okay, I'm going to shoot this shot with control no matter what, because that's a principle by which I live. It's just, I'm doing that. That's my only option, right? And then half draw moment, I'm going to do this right. Whatever you want to say at half draw, that's a principle by which I live, because I am going to do it right. Now, I'm not always going to hit the 10 ring, obviously, but I'm going to control everything that I can in my mind. Yeah. And then finally, the most important one is that critical second. After you've aimed, after you've set your finger on the trigger, here I go. Right. That one, I wouldn't recommend that you put that one too deep in the toolbox. It's got to always be in the toolbox, but it should be toward the top, because here I go, being the most important decision, I feel it's, you're going to use that in a high stress event. I've used it in some very high stress events, right? Yeah. So it's not just talk. It's a decision to do a movement that's going to cause your body impact. And that is completely against human nature, right? So it's such a cool and powerful thing to know that, and to know that when you go on that hunt that costs you, months of your life and thousands of dollars, you know how you're going to control your shot, because why wouldn't you?
Yep.
You know exactly how you're going to do it. So, but you got to find as much stress as you can so that you get better reps. Right? Like, if I'd have jumped out of that river and then shot my bow, of course, I probably couldn't even pull it back because my thumb was so damn cold. But, I've done snow baths and then jump up and shoot an arrow, and find as much stress as you can so you get better reps, because what you're trying to get reps in is concentration practice, reps in decision making, reps in letting the aim go. So one of the good things for your listeners to do is to take all the stabilizers off their bow and shoot on one foot, because you get so many reps in bringing your mind back to where it needs to be, because your mind's going to go from your balance to your sight movement. Oh my God, that thing's everywhere. Wait a minute. I don't need to think about that. Bring it back to the release movement, right? No, I'm going to fall over again, right? Oh my God, my sights are everywhere. Nope. Bringing it back to the release movement. So you get tons of reps in one shot, right? And you get reps in the true skills of precision shooting.
Yeah, that's funny. I like the method of shooting off of 1 foot. That's gonna be tough for me because I'm very unstable as it is. But
Well, that's even better. You'll get even stronger reps.
Exactly.
And this is not for just beginner level people. I mean, I've taught this to professional archers, and they thought I was crazy. Like, you want me to do what? I'm like, take all your stabilizers off your bow and shoot on 1 foot. And it's those pros that have trouble letting go of the aim. That's a great drill because they get reps and going, because the pin's moving so much, they're finally go, well, who knows where the hell this is going to hit. And then and only then do they finally basically submit to the fact that they have no control over their aim. And the only thing they can control is the release movement, right?
Yeah, and you've trained some pretty high profile people as far as in the archery world and everything. I bet that's tough from their standpoint to kind of let go of what they think they know and listen.
It is, and those that but some of them, I won't say all of them, but some of them are smart enough and humble enough to go, okay, I don't know who you are, but I'm going to listen to you, because it's very easy for me to speak to their problems because I went through all that stuff too. Yep. And they're very successful archers, but they don't win all their tournaments, and they have these good days and bad days still. And they're all scared to death of my son, who's 14 years old and is going to, destroy the professional archer world because he shoots the same controlled arrow every single time. And so they know he's coming, so they're going to have to do something, right? They have to they're going to have to up their mental game. That's just the way it is, right? So.
Interesting. Is your son shooting competitively now?
Oh yeah. In fact, he's probably going pro next year. So
really?
Yeah. He's just turned 14 in February. He won the Rushmore Rumble in the young adult category, and, shoot offs in front of all the pros and all the people and all that stuff. And people are like, oh my God, his name is Bodie Turner, and it's Bodie Hunter Turner. So he's Beau Hunter Turner for short. But so that's how we got that name. But so anyways, when he's shooting in these shoot-offs, we're like, oh my God, Bodie looks so calm and all this stuff, but he's not. He has the same nerves as everybody else, but he has this toolbox that is very deep with mental tools, right? When he's moving his release, he's screaming to himself to keep it rolling. The only advice I ever give Bodie for high-stress shooting events is keep it moving, because I know his visual proprioception is going to bring the pin back to the middle, no matter how much it's shaken, right? But if the release movement stops, that means your conscious mind left it and it went somewhere else, right? So if you notice that because you're moving closed loop and you notice an error, then give it another here I go, right? Give it another here I go, and that's the giant reset button. And so, he's got the same nerves as everybody else, but he's got these mental tools because he's heard me say it so many times. And I didn't sit Bodie down and say, okay, these are open and closed loop control systems and all that stuff. He didn't need to know that at 3 years old. He just needed to know that you're not allowed to let the arrow go until that thing clicks on your bow or whatever it was, whatever system we were shooting. He was shooting a tension activated release at 3 years old, because at 3, he started punching the trigger on an index finger trigger when I knew that was going to happen. Yeah. So, but, not allowing him to shoot shots that weren't perfectly controlled is where we went. And, when he's 2.5, 3 or 4 or 5 years old, he's not mature enough to know the difference between all this stuff. I would hand him a certain release and say, okay, this is how it works, knowing that tension activated release made decisions for him. right? Because nothing happens until after you take the safety off, and nothing happens unless you pull, right?
Yep.
So that's what I hate to see, though, is adults get into tension activated releases and then have to stay there because you're not getting reps in making decisions because the release makes the decisions for you. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. I'm following you.
And so, you push the safety and you draw back, you aim, and then you let the safety off. And that's, it's just making the decisions for you. So you're stuck shooting tension activated releases, which is not the most accurate release. If it was, every pro would shoot them. But the problem is, like we were talking about before, and moving the head of the release.
Yeah.
You can't make that thing go off without moving the head of the release. So therefore, it's not the most accurate thing out there. But if you're having trouble making decisions, I will use one in a clinic shots, but I'll probably set it so hard it'll never go off. Right. So I get to see where people's fail point is because they'll be pulling. They're not pulling very hard. They start pulling, then they give it a big old yank to try to make it go off. And that's the subconscious just giving up on it, or your conscious mind giving up on it and handing it to the subconscious.
Yep.
And then I blueprint that. Okay, what were you thinking about? Well, I was thinking about pulling, and then I thought, God, when is this thing going to go off? And that's the exact moment that they gave it the big yank, right? So then once I get them to pull and stay in it, and there's no yanks in it, but it doesn't go off still, push the safety back in, let it down. And then they're on the same questions. What were you thinking? God, I was just thinking about pulling. What were you saying? I was saying, keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling. Could you have stopped it? Yeah, I could have stopped it anywhere. What decisions did you make? I decided to keep pulling no matter what, right?
Yeah.
So now we start into the blueprint, and then and only then can I give them a different release. And then once they start to apply that same science to the other releases, then it's just, you can shoot anything you want.
Interesting. And then that applies, I mean, if you have that mind to any weapon, anything else that you're doing, do you see anything with your own self? Like when you analyze your own self, do you ever fall apart at all in your system? Do you ever have those days or moments, or no matter what, it's just happening?
I used to, but I mean, back in those years, 2008 to 2014, I didn't know what it was going to be. I didn't know if I was going to get through my clicker on this particular shot, or I didn't know if I was going to or wasn't going to. There was wonder. When I drew my bow back, I was wondering how it was going to go. And it wasn't until that day in 2014 when I'm like, I know exactly how to do it. Why don't I just do this every single time? And the more that I research and the more that I teach, finding those fail points, my determination is super high because being a police sniper, I don't have the option of missing.
Yeah.
Right. So my determination well is very deep, and I know where it's at. Right. And I've had to go dig into it before, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So my determination is very high, and that's where I find a lot of people, and it's a personality thing as well, because I've been a determined person my whole life, as many people have, but nobody knew what to do with it. Nobody knew. They would turn frustration and anger into determination, but they would never take the determination and use it to make decisions.
They would just practice their own failures.
Right. They just keep getting more and more and more pissed off until some fateful moment when they go, I ain't doing it like this anymore. Some people quit archery. Others like me go, I ain't doing it like this anymore. And you change how you do it, no matter what. Right. So no, I don't find myself failing in my shot process ever. No way, no how. And I know that's a big, bold statement. People are like, oh, there's no way you could do that. Well, I don't know. Challenge me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it. That doesn't mean that I'm going to hit the X every time, but that means I'm getting through, like on my stick bow, I'm getting through my mechanoreceptive trigger no matter what. If I was shooting a compound, I'm working that trigger with a closed loop control system no matter what. I don't care who you are, how big the critter is. I've had monsters walk out of my sight picture before, and I left with a smile on my face, and people are, that's crazy, right? But I have a whole barn full of antlers of critters that I've killed with uncontrolled shots. They're in the barn. The ones in the house are the only ones that I've killed with controlled shots. You don't make it into the house of shot control, right? The Turner house, you don't make it into the house without a controlled shot, right? So now I'm able to put critters in the house. And, you know, some my wife likes and some she doesn't.
I was just going to say, right? That's funny.
But I mean, my wife shoots controlled shots. My son shoots controlled shots. That's the way we live. That's what we're going to do. And, you know, I'm not saying that if a bull walks by me at 3 yards, am I going to get through my mechanoreceptive trigger? No, I'm not, because that's not what the environment needs. I need to get this shot off, right, at 3 yards. If it's walking, if it's a moving target, I have to know when my bow is going to go off. Am I going to have pre-ignition movements in there? Yep, but it's 3 yards, right? I'm going to be able to stick it through his lungs. If it's a running rabbit, I'm not getting through a mechanoreceptive trigger on a running rabbit. If it's a flying pheasant, that's not the environment, right? It's the same thing in you know, pistols and gunfighting and stuff. I'm not going to press a trigger perfectly if I get in a gunfight at 7 feet.
Yeah.
That's not the environment for that. But if that same bad guy is 40 yards away, if I don't go close loop on the trigger, I know I'll never hit him. And I don't have the option of slinging 15 rounds down range, right?
Yep.
I have to be able to control my business. I mean, you hear about gunfights all the time with cops that are, if the gunfight's past 15 yards, ain't nobody going to get hit. I mean, they just shoot and shoot and shoot, and bad guys shoot and shoot, and nobody gets hit. Woo, boy, that was a dandy. We got lucky on that one, right? So, I mean, we've been having a lot of shootings up here in Washington, and it's bad news, man. But you know, like they had one the other day where the cops set up this thing and it was like 20 to 25 yards away from the bad guy. He steps out with a pistol. Well, you have to know that you're going to go open loop on the trigger in that particular situation, but you're outside of your open loop effective range, right? So what do? You got to change weapon systems, right? That's when we take our rifles to gunfights and such. But anyways, that's kind of off topic, but that's the way all this stuff runs.
Yeah.
You know, you have to be able to recognize your environment that you're in. If you can go open loop because it's super close and it's moving, then yeah, do it. But if it's standing there, you know, especially if it's a target and not a live critter, why in the hell would you ever punch the trigger on that? It ain't going anywhere. You know, there's not necessarily a massive time limit on you. So, you know, but if that critter's standing out there at 30 yards and it's stationary, treat it as a closed loop environment. Do your job, control what you can, and because the critters deserve that, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree with that 100%. And yeah, I'll definitely be, like I said, taking it into my other avenues, not just, you know, bow hunting. I'm going to be turkey hunting here in a couple weeks and going to that with the shotgun. Same thing. Making sure I'm shooting a controlled shot and the whole way across the board, and even pistol shooting, everything else.
Yeah. Now shotguns are a little bit different. Like if the target's moving, it's open loop on the trigger. Yeah. Right? You're going to have pre-ignition movements that are in there, but it's a shotgun. That's why you have a pattern to deal with, right? But if it's, you know, if you want to take a precision shot, like if that gobbler's at full strut, and you can, you know, burn him that way, then yeah, put that bead on it, put that red on it, however you're working. And if you can work yourself through a shotgun trigger, knowing that you got a 3.5-inch nuclear magnum round in that shotgun that kicks more than a 500 Nitro Express does, right? Yeah. Then you're doing something, right? Good on you for some concentration practice with that, man. But if that thing pokes his head up and starts bobbing away, just open loop his ass, man. Just make sure that you aim first, right? Yeah. Because it's open loop doesn't mean you're not going to aim first. Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, and I have a problem with shotguns. I had an old 1890s 12 gauge blow up on me, what happened was I was running through the action there quickly, and I didn't close it all the way before I pulled the trigger on the next round. And those ones didn't have it where it would still fire at that point.
It was probably a model 1897. Did it have was it a pump shotgun?
Yeah.
Did it have a hammer on it?
It did.
Yeah, that's probably a model 97. That they're notorious for open breech detonation.
Oh yeah, it's hanging on the camp wall. So it knocked me me out. I had metal shavings in my eye and all this stuff.
Geez.
And I was there with my grandfather and my brother, and they're both on. Instead, I'm laying on the ground, and they're making sure the gun's okay. They're like, "Oh no, our gun's gone." You know?
Well, I guess you saw where you rated.
Yeah, they're like, every time we're at camp, it's sitting up on the wall underneath these underneath this whitetail antlers, and every time we're over there, like, yeah, that used to be our favorite gun to shoot until you screwed that up for us. I'm like, nice. I went to get LASIK eye surgery, and they're like, did you ever have any, like, you have some, like, rust in your eyes? I'm like, I don't remember anything. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I had a gun blow up on me. And they're like, how do you forget that? It's like, I don't know.
So, climb in on that shotgun, and if he's stationary, then you do your job. If he's not, then just burn him down, buddy.
Just burn him down. I love it. Oh, man, Joel, thank you so much for coming on here. And
buddy.
If people want to find out, more about your stuff here, and you really dive into, you have a bunch of, you have 3 different courses on your website?
Yeah.
And
so I do shotiq.com, and I do control process shooting. There's an archery course. There's also a precision pistol course. I've got another course on there that's not actually me, but it's use of force, justifiable use of force and such, with a buddy of mine. But, those 2 shooting courses, we go into the whole science of the mind. It's not, I keep it fairly simple, right? But very impactful. And it is a very thoughtful course, and it's very thought provoking, and it will change how you approach the house, right? The old house of shot control. It will change how you approach your shot. And it going through the whole science. And then we have a whole traditional track for all the traditional archers out there. We talk about mechanoreceptive triggers and triggerless shooting and how to run them and what happens in your mind. Then we have the whole compound track where you're dealing with, I talk about all the different types of releases, how to run them, and, how to gain mental control of that. We talk about how to practice. We talk about decision sequencing, blueprinting, all that stuff. I mean, you come out of that thing with control and knowing exactly how you did it, and it is very powerful information. So
awesome. So shotiq.com, and then is there anywhere else you can find your stuff? You're talking about, you posted something earlier. What's your
Instagram media? Is Joel Turner _ShotIQ. Give me a follow there. And Facebook is the same. And there's a ShotIQ page and a Joel Turner page, and however you like it, man. I'm all over social media.
You're all over it. Yeah. You don't picture me as a guy that would like to be on social media, but you're all over it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a way to reach people. It's obviously the best way to reach people. And I think this message is so friggin' important that, I mean, it just drives me insane to watch people shoot with target panic and have frustration. And that's where I was, and that's why I can speak intelligently to it. I mean, I used to hold 5 feet off of a target and then just dump my bow and let it go all at the same time. It was a freaking nightmare, bro.
Yeah.
So I've been there. I've experienced every form of target panic known to mankind. And there is a very simple, not easy, but simple way to fix this stuff. And it's not something that takes 6 months or a year. It takes one shot for you to, be determined enough to make the decisions so that you're present, so that you can actually concentrate. You shoot that perfect shot, and then you blueprint it. And then you use the next shot to make the blueprint stronger, and the next shot, and the next shot, to the point where the decisions become principles by which you live. And then the world is yours, man. You can go conquer anything you want. You can even go jump in a freezing cold river with no problem.
I thought you were going to say with no clothes on.
Yeah. Well, I only had shorts on this morning. Check out the post, folks.
I will. All right, Joel. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Greatly appreciate it. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Beau.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.